So welcome back down to the Building Performance Hub podcast. I'm joined by somebody who definitely inspires me, our friend Nathan Wood. Nathan is somebody that when we decided to start the podcast, I immediately said, I need this guy on. This guy has such a cool story and is such an advocate for high-performing buildings and indoor air quality. And I'd love to know a little bit more about where that came from. And we're gonna jump right in. So, you want to introduce yourself? Tell the audience who you are.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Nathan Wood. I'm a managing director of a ventilation specialist company called Farmwood. And aside from Farmwood, I do loads of stuff like this to benefit the industry as a whole. Yeah. I think that's the main way of putting it across. So from associations to air quality standards, school air quality initiatives and everything else, always willing to spend my time talking and explaining and hopefully just raise the bar for everybody in the industry.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting things is you're quite prolific on social media. We'll make sure to put all of your social medias down in the description below so people can click. And that it's enjoyable to watch. I'm always telling people to go and follow you because you highlight on an almost daily basis big problems in the industry. But before we jump into too much of now, as is customary with all our guests, we'll talk through a little bit about how you got to do what you do. Start with, I've as always, I've pulled your LinkedIn, and I was actually, something I didn't know about you is we had a very similar start. So I also did an engineering apprenticeship.
Okay.
And I absolutely loved my engineering apprenticeship. And so you've come from school and done the same thing from the Isle of Sheppey.
Yeah, it was, and I think this is probably a really good place to start because we know about the skills shortage and everything else. We've got grandfather rights disappearing at the top end, so we're losing mentorship, and we've got no apprentices coming through. But my journey, if you like, to become an apprentice was because my qualifications are no good. You might as well go and see if you're good with your hands. That was pretty much it. Well, you're not academic. Maybe look at mechanics and engineering. Okay. So yeah, I basically failed my GCSEs. Not in a big way, but not where I wanted them. A bit of a shock to the system. And back then there was the start of the GMVQs, which we called the General No Value Qualification, but they did give me the equivalents in GCSEs. So that was a sixth form, 1 year course, multiple guess questions and everything else, really poorly run, I must admit. My school's been knocked down and rebuilt and the teachers have moved on, so I can say what I like on that one. Once that was sort of finished, back then you did have 40, 50, 60, 100 people going for apprenticeships, going for jobs. And I'd always fall down at the last hurdle. You do the aptitude tests. You'd have I remember one, I think it was for Thames Water, where you had an outside tap and a box of bits put together. And they put too many olives in the pack and stuff like that, and you just had to build it. So get all the way through last sort of final exams or interviews and just never quite made the grade. So I had a part-time job at local Tesco's in the evenings. My parents said to me, look, we'd support you, why don't you go to college? So I went to Canterbury College and done a national certificate, I think it was, or national diploma in engineering for 2 years. Loved it. And it was almost as if these were my people. Yeah. I didn't enjoy school. School was all right. But being around people and engineering where it was hands-on work and also the theory behind it all, it was like a light bulb came on. And I was like, right, okay, here we go. Finished that, and then again, looked for jobs, looked for apprenticeships, but I found that an apprenticeship would have been taking me back because I'd already done like the engineering MVQ and carried it on. And then where I live on the Isle of Sheppey, there was a major steel recycling plant, and they were taking on apprentices. So I was like, right, get in there. But because I'd already done it was an NC, the paperwork and the credentials, they could sort of fast track certain elements, so I wouldn't have to do certain parts of the apprenticeship. So I was 19, working alongside school leavers. So that was a bit of a learning curve because these guys were just acing it straight through, really good grades, and they would lean on me for some things, and I'd lean on them for a lot more. Absolutely loved the place. Absolutely loved it. The true mentorship, the camaraderie. You know, I remember there was a 90-ton ladle of molten steel at the breakout. So basically, the steel goes through everything. You know, you can imagine the temperatures of that stuff. And I remember walking in and no one being around, and I'm just like, what the hell's going on? And then you realise there's been a breakout, and not that we should have done at that stage, but we worked like all the way through. I can't remember how many hours we all worked, and it was just get this done, get that done, and it was all hands on deck. And that's what I loved about the steelworks. What I know about air quality now, I should never have stepped in the place.
Yeah.
But it really, really was an amazing place. So I qualified as an engineer. I was put on the crane crew, and as with most steel plants, they were constantly, you know, in the news for redundancies and under administration. And literally one day, I remember going in, we got called into a big meeting, and they shut the whole place down. So there was, I don't know how many hundreds of steel workers all out of work at the same time. I just bought my first house, mortgage and everything else, so panic stations. And it was like going back to when I was an apprentice, you know, loads of people in the room for the next jobs where everybody was out of a job, but it was all your colleagues.
Yeah, that's
all of you, and
horrible.
you're sort of thinking, okay, this isn't great. So I went from the steelworks, probably one of the dirtiest, most polluted industries I'd ever been in, to food processing, one of the cleanest. So I'm not sure if it's on my LinkedIn, but I went to a place called W.A. Turner's in Tunbridge Wells. So anybody that remembers the Jamie Oliver chalkboard picture for Sainsbury's best pork, whatever, that's where it was all filmed and all that. So it was one side was freezing cold sausage, the other side was really nice and warm and smelt lovely in the bakery. And I had a massive learning curve of having German manuals and all of this crazy machinery, and they're like, well, you're an engineer, fix it. And it's just like, okay, let's stand on my own 2 feet now.
It's actually fascinating because I had an incredibly similar journey in that I did an apprenticeship, absolutely loved my apprenticeship, come out of school with average GCSEs, and then went into the big wide world of work. But I went from the opposite. I went from working in a clean room, where you'd wear a lab jacket all day. I would spend 8 hours a day with rubber gloves on, changing them, 2 or 3 times an hour, to make sure we didn't cross-contaminate any of the high-performance machinery, to working in construction, where the environment was then completely different, and I was so out of my comfort zone on a construction site, trying not to get my hands dirty. It was a learning curve. It was interesting you went the other way around.
It was. And I remember we'd come out of the steelworks black. You know, you'd shower at the end of the day, and it would just be black, and then you'd go to the food plant, and you'd have to, if the slightest bit of stubble, beard snood, and hat snood, and change your boots, change your PPE, and one side of a wall was the clean zone. But so that was really interesting. Although it was shift work, because I had the mortgage and I was young, doing all of the hours under the sun. And at the same time, my dad had started up Farmwood. So my dad was an engineer for he dotted around most of the London sort of main FM providers, and they had a service contract with a ventilation provider. And my dad just tended to be the guy that was used for the call-outs and everything else. They said, we've set up with a small company up north, it's working really well, have you ever thought about setting something up on your own? And that's how sort of Farmwood was born. So Farmers, my mum's maiden name, Wood's my dad, so that's how that sort of comes together. And he was going for nearly a year until he said, look, do you fancy jumping on board? And I was like, I'm fed up working shift. Let's give this a go for a little while. And it was literally going to be, I'll help you out for a bit, and then I'll get another job. And 23 years later, here we are.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you jumped straight in, and at the time, Farmwood were fabricating. Was it a fabrication business? Or?
It was literally service provider for 1 or 2 of the main UK ventilation manufacturers.
Okay.
And it was boring. It was, honestly, I remember seeing one of their PCBs for the first time, and I remember thinking, I've got the soldering iron, God, have I got any solder, I've got to make sure this. I said, where do we get the resistors from? And he went, no. He said, you just take it out, package it up, put the new one in, turn it on. So, I'm used to
start
sort
of
of
the end, yeah.
I'm used to taking things apart, investigating. Production line, you've got a queue of people waiting for stuff to happen. The pressure's on. It just didn't sort of.
It was the same as me. I was one of the last years in my engineering college that one of my exams, I remember being an extremely large printer, and it had a fault. They'd made a fault, and we used to take the circuit diagrams and we would use the 50-50 technique to try and figure out which signal, where it was broken, find the component and replace it. That was my exam, and I went from that environment to a throwaway PCB environment as well, where if it didn't work, you threw it out, you tried another one. That didn't work, you threw it out. No one cared why that didn't work. They kind of do after you throw out a bunch, but such a society where, we're the last people that can fix those kind of things. And always makes me smile when I see a big old machine with components you can fix, you can take stuff out of. Whereas nowadays everything is so tiny. You don't fix your phones, you don't remove PCBs off your phone. You just you just take the whole thing out, chuck it away, and buy a new one. Long gone are those good days.
There's nothing better, I find, and there are pressurised times when a building's near handover and the ventilation system's not working, and you've got to get things going. But I think everybody should experience the pressure of a production line team breathing down your neck, going, fix it, and it's the first time. It's anything. I remember there being, it was a meat dicing, so the meat would come through, it'd fall into this space, and it would just dice it and send it on. And whilst you're trying to fix it, underneath there would be like mouldy bits of meat and stuff, and the smell is horrendous, and you're trying to get to solenoids and stuff and work out what one's not pulling in. Yeah, that's pressure. That's real pressure.
That was a good old days. So Farnwood, you joined them, you joined your dad, and operating service contracts, swapping bits out. How do you go from operating effectively service contracts to then taking up such a keen interest in air quality? Just talk about how do you bridge that gap? Because you've gone from it almost feeling like a job, a 9 to 5. Well, realistically, service contracts, you're working in the middle of the night. But talk to me about how you've gone from that to then suddenly thinking about air quality as a thing. What's the trigger?
It's I can't actually explain how Farnwood has grown, but whatever we do, if we could blueprint it and explain it to people, it'd be fantastic, because it's just been organic growth, right place, right time, lady luck, whatever you want to call it. I just think that's how Farnwood has grown. But just being my dad and me, and eventually he'd stay at home in the, wasn't even his office, in the dining room table, and I'd be up London or here, there and everywhere. I think it was because he was well known with different manufacturers and different companies and everything else, there was always this opportunity for other contracts to come in. Do you do AC? Oh, we're getting an AC guy in, and that growth came along. And I was just sort of bumbling along. I wasn't even this, I wasn't even like a governor's son. You go and do that and we'll have an easy time. I was in and amongst it, all ready to just roll up my sleeves. And I think that was because of my nurturing at the steel mill. That sort of, you get on and you get on, you're a part of a team. And we tried to instill that with the rest of the team as they came through. So we took on apprentices, which have been the lifeblood of the business. And it was always making sure that they were exposed to what I was exposed to. It's a bit like, we do this even now. When someone's first making off a steel wire armoured cable and you see that they've left the sleeve on the side, you don't tell them until they've finished the job.
Oh, yeah. It's a rite of passage, but it's a harsh one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you missed? And they go, and then they see him think, well, I could slice down the back of that, fold it round, and you're like, do it again. Because you know that they won't make that mistake. But going from helping my dad with the business to actually saying, right, okay, what we do changes people's outcomes, health outcomes, and we're not just fixing a fan on a roof. We're making sure that people inside I can't say breathing clean air, but their air quality in terms of ventilation is improved. And I think it comes down to LinkedIn, because and my youngest son Rory. So Roars is now 9. You might have seen him. He's been on a few of our World Ventilation Day with the the air blower in my other son's face and stuff. And I remember one night doing the night feed, being a responsible parent, and then having my mobile phone in the other hand.
Classic.
And I literally set up my LinkedIn profile, just finished it off, I think, and just started connecting with people like the hashtag HVAC or whatever. But loads of people in the States and in Europe were talking about this thing called IAQ. And I'm like, there's too many abbreviations in here. You know, what's IAQ?
We love an acronym abbreviation.
Yeah.
In
so
construction.
I sort of went down the rabbit hole, woke up the next day, going to work, and they always say I'm like an excited puppy, the tail's wagging me. And I said, just right, stop what you're doing. I think what we do has got massive health benefits, and we're not using it as a sales angle. That was the main driver initially. So connected with loads of people, started learning slowly about the different aspects around health. And I was thinking I should have done harder, but I'm better at school to understand everything that's going on with, like, you know, biology
So
and everything
this is
else.
pre-COVID, right?
Before COVID, yeah.
Pre-COVID.
So this is 9 years ago, nearly 10 years ago, and I think it must have been in a matter of months after me sort of becoming all animated and reading. I went into the history of air quality. Back to the London smog of the 1950s, started buying magazines and all sorts of stuff, and just understanding that what they were talking about back then, it was smog, but we're still using similar technologies and in some cases threshold limits today.
Yeah.
And making that relation, like, why has nothing changed in what we do? So we're bringing in potentially smog, and when we was talking about, someone mentioned it the other day, like, acid rain, the hole in the ozone, you know, global warming, and now it's like net zero, ESG, you know. So started not collaborating, just like trying to find out who's doing what. You know, there was purifiers back then I never knew about, filter classes, started talking with different organisations, and that's when it really started to sort of move on. So by that stage we had a small office in Sittingbourne with a small little kitchen area at the back, and we had an MVHR set up. So I was like, we need to make this like a bit of a showpiece. I mean, I love something like this, but I remember putting blue lights around it, not because of UV or anything, just to dress it up like LEDs. And we then bought one of the first, which back then were really expensive, the smart switches, and I had an apprentice set up a do button, if this, then that. And
Yeah.
I could use my phone and boost the ventilation system. And I'm like, we are cutting edge. Check us out. You know, this is amazing. Started using some really basic air quality monitors, and within a matter of months of all of this going on, the BBC DIY SOS came to Sheppey, and we're like, we're going to do this. This is great. So once again, like an excited puppy. And the process for these programs is crazy. You literally meet up with the team, the production team at the local working men's club, the big queue of burly contractors that are all there trying to get in brickies and everything else. And it's the chap's name's Mark, and I recently met him at one of the expos. I said to him, ventilation system, we're going to put in this whole house ventilation system, air quality monitoring, don't need it, shut me down, next. And I was like, no, seriously, you know, health and well-being, and he's just like, I don't think we need it. It's lovely, great idea, but I really don't think we need it. I went, look, I won't get in your way. We're going to be in the roof, out the way, a few air valves in the ceiling, wireless air quality monitor, done. He went, if you get in the way of any trades, you're gone. I don't care how far along you are, it's out. I was like, thank you very much. Next. So I came away sort of excited, but like they didn't get it.
Frustrated, yeah.
Yeah, they just didn't understand what we was trying to put across. So it was sponsored by a UK manufacturer. They gave us the MVHR and the ventilation system and a loose design. And then there was a European air quality monitoring company, one of the first IoT monitors that we had as well. Explained it to the guys, and they're like, all right, so we're working late, are we? You know, we've got to be on this all hours. Okay,
Yep.
You paying us for this? I was like, yeah, you know. But there is a better good to all of this. It's a DIY SOS, and they're like, right, okay, so you get your new high-vis with the right size logo, so the BBC won't blur it
so they
out.
won't put tape over it.
Yeah. And then you turn up for the first meeting, and the place has been demolished. I didn't realise they was completely demolishing this bungalow and rebuilding it. And I'm like, you don't need me for months. And they're like, no, next week. And I'm like, okay.
So it really operates at that speed.
Honestly,
DOIS, it really goes up that quick.
It's crazy. And all of the guys, I can't remember all their names, like Jules the plasterer, and obviously Nick Knowles, and then you've got Billy the electrician. They're all there. They're all hands on deck. It's not turn up.
It's not turn up and
click,
film.
click, click,
yeah.
and then they're off. They're there first thing at the tea wagon, having a cup of tea, having loads of selfies done. I don't know how they accept so many selfies in a day. And it was graft, and it was a bit like the steel mill. If somebody needed something, it's not my job, mate. I'm doing the vent. It was, yep, there you go. Anyone got this? Yep, take that, hold that. It was an amazing experience, and the guys went from being, I can't say negative, they were up for it, but they went from being sort of like, okay, we're back there today, like, right, no, it's great, and I've got to pick up some light bulbs for somebody, they needed some different lamps and stuff, and I'm like, why are we doing that? That's not our gig.
Do you know what's fascinating about that is that it's because the mindset changes, so you're not doing it for a salary at that point, you're doing it for someone, and I guess at some point you would have met that someone in the Isle of Sheppey. From memory, did they have breathing difficulties or something?
Yeah, so it's the Ratcliffes. We've become really good friends, and actually they're, I think they put out, is it 7 years they said it was, or 6 years now? I think it's 7 years since they've set up a charity off the back of it, and maybe I'll come on to that a bit later on. But yeah, so the Ratcliffe family, Kyle and Gary, they adopted 4 really amazing kids, all with their own issues, be that learning difficulties, physical, health, and the main kid, Curly, or Curtis, fondly known as Curly, same age as my eldest, and they're happy with me saying this. He's a really poorly kid, was a really poorly kid, still is a really poorly kid. His life expectancy wasn't very good. He was in and out of the Evelina, and I remember the first time after the show when I went back and met with them, I didn't know that he was in the wheelchair beside me, and I felt so bad. The first thing I knew that Curly was there was when something beeped and made me look. I was just like, welled up, got upset, you know. So you get the backstory: adopted kids, poorly kids, respiratory conditions, this, that, and the other, and I'm going, this is great, this is going to work, you know, this is going to really help them out. I'd love the opportunity to go and meet with the family afterwards and explain everything. And I remember getting so far down the build with the guys, and somebody went up in the roof and put their foot straight through the ducting, because it was a pre-insulated formed ducting, but it's strong enough and rigid, but if someone puts their size 9s through it, it's done. Yeah. I was like, we can't get this isn't on the shelf, you know. So I remember taping it back and said, don't worry, once everything's done, we'll come back and sort it out. And the BBC were like, no, you don't come back. You leave the people to it. It's their home. You can't just come back and start carrying on with the work. So I was like, okay, I'm thinking, whatever. I'm local. I drive past the place every day now. So then you have to wait like 6 months for the show to be aired. So you've done all of this work, it's all built up, and then you're just waiting for the email to come through to say, it's going out next Thursday, BBC One, this time. And all I could think about, there was a really funny point where Nick Knowles is coming around and doing the wrap-up, like the final show of it all finished and everything else. And back then I was going through a bit of a stage where I wore quite leery socks. And since that it's all finished, it was either overshoes or you took shoes off. And I'm like, I'm going to take my shoes off. I've got my wacky socks on. And you can sort of hear him in the background going around. So I'm waiting in... I can't remember which room it was. I had the air quality monitor in my hand and literally waiting for them to come through the door. So I was going, oh, hi, you know, position it with the logo.
Love that.
Fancy seeing you here. And sure enough, door bursts open. In comes Nick Knowles. Pretty much like the setup here. Camera, you know, boom mic and everything else. And all he says is, Christ, look at them socks. And the camera pans down. I wiggled my toes. He went, I've got pants on like that today. And me being quite cheeky, I just turned around and said, well, you know what they say, Nick? You've seen mine, let's see yours. And he goes, righto. And he starts turning around, undoing his belt. And I'm just thinking, this is going to make the telly. We're definitely going to get on the TV with this. And they were for testicular testicular cancer awareness. And he literally dropped his trousers, waved his crutch at the camera. Everyone's falling around laughing, like everyone. Turns to me, buttoning up his trousers and goes, so, tell us about this ventilation system you've put in then. And I'm like, I've got to sort of switch. And my 30 seconds of fame, I'm like the rabbit in the headlights. It's literally
because he's thrown you.
Air quality, particulate matter, and ventilation system automation. Right, that's great. So is it the first one in the world then? Is it the first one in the UK? I said, I believe it is one of the first in the UK. Great, lovely stuff. Thank you so much. Right, on we go. And he disappears off. And you're like, oh, fluffed it. I had my moment and it all went wrong. And of course you wait 6 months and everyone was watching, everyone at work was watching it, and it comes around to my bit, completely cut out the crutch to the camera and everything else. So there's me just going, particular, so I'm like stumbling my way through it. And I remember saying and they zoomed in on the air quality monitor, and I'd cut out one of our stickers with our little Farmwood logo, stuck it on
Tiniest little sticker.
and they zoomed in on it. And I'm like, this is it, fantastic. I mean, you get the guy's high vises and stuff, but it was right on the monitor, and he says that it was a UK first and all the rest of it. So the next day at work, I remember saying to the girls, keep the coffees coming. I'm going to be a busy man today. Sat by the phone. Not a single phone call. And I don't think since then we've ever had a phone call based on that project. So in the back of your mind, it's a business decision. You know, you do it all for free.
Of course, you're spending money, yeah.
But a lot of what we do at Farmwood comes from the heart, and it's normally the heart overrules the head. And the value that we've got from doing that project and talking about that project has paid off in the long run, but there's no big payoff. So we've done loads of other projects with the BBC since. We've done one in Bromley, a young boy called Arlo. He made me cry my eyes out, and I don't do emotion. Yeah. He's one of the only children in the UK that's got such a high dependency of oxygen that he's allowed to be at home, but he's got a constant trachea with a constant pressurised air feed onto him. So they didn't demolish his house, but they done a big refurb so he could live downstairs. And again, I don't think a lot of people go back.
I think I remember this.
Do you remember this one?
I think I remember this one.
So that was.
Was it something to do? The paint was a big thing. In this one.
VOCs for the paint and everything else. And we had a wall-mounted purifier, and I remember the ginger designer lady. Right, is it Blackman? And she had this designer wallpaper. And I'm like, why don't we wrap the front of the purifier with the same wallpaper? She went, I'll send you a sample, darling, if you can do that for me. I was like, no problem. Literally, the sample turned up like millimetres away from being the wrong size. And I'm like, I've got to make this work. One shot of this. So we worked it all out, put it all on, took it there, clipped the cover on. She was overjoyed. And again, you then wait a long time. But I said, look, can I come back? Can I just give my details? I'd like to come back, explain what it is, because it will need servicing. It doesn't have to come from me. They can buy them direct. No problem. Went in and met Michael, and literally got to the door, opened up the door, and he's just like on me. Massive hug.
Oh, bless.
And he said, out of everything that they've done here for Arlo, he said, what you've done has been the most important, and it's taken me on another journey, because we didn't understand air quality. We just thought that we come inside, we close our doors, and we're safe. Arlo's at home and we're safe. He said, but knowing that that purifier is conditioning the air for him, and it runs 24/7 and this, that and the other. So we went in, I turned the corner, and Arlo's in bed, asleep. And he went, oh, he's asleep. You know, so we sort of went in and had a look. I was like, oh, that's great. Yeah, went back in the kitchen. And then he started to wake up. He must have heard different voices. Yeah. And he sort of sat up, and I'm looking at him. And as soon as he sat up, and you see he's got this sort of tracking plasters all around him, I just completely lost it. I turned around. I didn't wear glasses back then, so I'm just like rubbing my eyes. I said, give us a minute. He said, you all right, mate? So he put him down and come up to me. So he gives me a hug. He starts crying. And then his wife walks in. She's like, what's going on here? So we like turn around to her. She bursts into tears because she realises who I am and what we've done for Arlo and stuff. And it was just this emotional outpouring. Yeah. And I remember leaving afterwards and just being like, this is it. This is why we do what we do. If we can do more of this, or if we can educate people so then they better understand that the quality of the air, regardless of sick children or not, I mean, don't get me wrong, it does pull on the heartstrings. if people understood that when they walk into a building, they are not invincible to the quality of the air in that space, and that when you're outside and you're walking down a busy road, you sort of get the idea, especially when it's cold and you can see the exhaust fumes coming out. People get that. They still don't understand that when you walk into a building or your home, you close your door, your Englishman's home isn't his castle. It definitely isn't, if they understood the quality of the air. And that's why, through showcasing what we've done with the Ratcliffes, to the associations that we belong to, they said to me, do you want to become a chairman of these IAQ groups? And that's where it all came about.
Yeah. So it's absolutely fascinating that was your journey, and you realised, well, you didn't realise, you knew, but the indoor air quality in our homes is poisoning us. I mean, it's a strong word, but it is. If you're not cooking with proper extraction, you are poisoning yourself. If you are sitting in a space that's been designed to be nice and airtight, well insulated, but not ventilated, you are poisoning yourself. It's a strong word, but it is so true. And ventilation is just this thing that happens in construction, particularly in the domestic sector, where we just ignore it. And so we just ignore it. We operate here, various training, domestic ventilation training. We have all of our rigs and stuff set up. But some of the terrifying phone calls that I've had have just been, I'm happy that people come to me with questions, but I'm also sad to me that people come to me with questions in 2024 about the most simplest of ventilation strategies. I'm also sad that I get constant calls from national newspapers about airtight homes killing people. And I said, it's nothing to do with the airtightness, it's everything to do with the ventilation. If ventilation is just not installed, or if it is installed and it's not working, it's not okay, it's not good enough. But for some reason, we just stopped checking our ventilation in our homes. At some point, I don't know when that happened, we just decided it's about okay. And that's the only check that's ever done. And we could be, we sometimes check for radon in our planning. We kind of give it the look and go, you've got a fan installed, great. But actually the proper commissioning and checking of these ventilation systems is an alarming problem this country needs to wake up to. And you've just given us two examples. You don't know who's going to live in that home when you hand over that home. It could be Curly, it could be, forgive me, the other guy. We don't know. We're assuming it's just going to be two healthy adults with no problems at all, no asthma, no other diseases, and it will be okay. But one of the things I used to say to my team when we were out air testing is, you don't know who's going to live there. You work for the homeowner. You're paid by the contractor, but you work for the homeowner. And I think we need to have a lot more of that mentality. It's just
you're right, it is a mentality, and I think in years gone by, it's just been a multi-trades, we can do that, we can put that in. I mean, there's some really old systems that we come across that have got to be 20 years old, MVHRs, and they've never been maintained. So 20 plus years ago, MVHRs were a thing. They were probably installed to the standards of the day, but they've never been maintained, never been touched. And this is true from shared ownership, social housing, your standard 3-bedroom, all the way up to high end. Everything all the way through, all have the same problems that we see, day in, day out. Hence all of the horror pictures that I share on LinkedIn. That's just from the farmwood guys doing their daily work. And it's all the time. It's just
that's honestly one of the things that makes your LinkedIn quite enjoyable to viewers. Every single day there's going to be another horror picture, and I shouldn't enjoy it, but I do, because deep down I guess I know you're doing something about it. You're there to fix it. You're not there to look at it and go, ha. Except in hotels, which
is a little thing of mine.
Between the two of us, we've stayed in plenty of hotels, and I think hotels should come with an air quality metric.
The first one to do it.
Yeah.
If the first hotel does it, I think everybody else
So,
would.
so later on in the series, we have Lisa Mallion, who's creating an air quality landlords certification scheme, and easy for me to say. And I think that could be incredibly powerful to start recognising this and start having landlords sign up and say, my ventilation system, my strategy has been checked and verified, and it becomes more attractive then to tenants wanting to rent a home. Hotels.com, Expedia, any of you guys are listening. People like us would select a hotel if it has electric car charging and an indoor air quality metric, because those two things, I don't care about the location, I don't care about the food. Being a type 1 diabetic, I should, but I don't. I care about, can I sleep at night? Am I going to be breathing in mould every time I go for a wee? Not for me. So, yeah, there's an idea. We'll pitch that on to Lisa to expand her certification scheme. Cool. So, you've done these incredible DIY big builds, and I'm one of those people who can't help but well up on basically every single one I've ever watched, because they're always incredible.
Yeah.
These happened 2018, 2019.
Yeah, around that, yeah.
Yeah. 2020 comes along. You know where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of plod along. We get to March, and COVID hits. What does that do? First of all, what does that do to you as a business? You immediately, furlough. We've got to send some employees home. The whole world has this uncertainty. But as a business, does that change anything for a ventilation company? Do you suddenly get an incredible spike in phone calls, or does nothing happen?
Yeah.
Genuinely intrigued.
Yeah, so it was an interesting time, COVID, for us. And although we did have family members and people that we knew, as the nation did and the globe did, that became poorly and hospitalised and everything else. So I'm not dressing over that, but as a business, yes, we furloughed. We didn't have to because we were in construction, so we were like key workers, if you like, but that sounds like we're ambulance drivers and all the rest of it. Key workers in terms of construction. So there were lots of sites that were desperately trying to keep going. And we collaborated with 2 other SMEs so we could stockpile a large amount or import a lot of PPE because you couldn't get it. That was the first problem we had to overcome. And again, collaborate with other people, they're all in the same place, put all your money together, you can get a lot more gear together. So that works out well to keep us and other businesses going. And then ultimately, it wasn't safe on sites. The feedback we was getting from the team was that it's just not safe. So we did furlough most of them. I kept on going in because various associations were running webinars and presentations in the morning, explaining furlough, talking about the process and what was going on. But before we closed down, I quickly realised we had an abundance of tech. Ventilation system purifiers, literally Blue Peter style, cobbled together ideas and stuff. And I was just like, we should give this out. We should, because at the time my neighbour was in the fire brigade, they were still having to go in. There was the nursery for the key workers' kids to go into. So I was ringing them all up, and amazingly, most of them said no.
So just so I'm clear, you've got a bunch of purifiers, ventilation systems, continuously running systems, and you phoned around and they're not interested. Was that because they didn't understand or they don't understand the impact of good ventilation, or were they more concerned with your presence, or it might be both? Because it was a scary time. It
was, yeah. Eventually I managed to, and it was sweet talk the nursery round, because my boys went to the nursery as well. I said, this isn't a business thing. There's going to be no charge. If you need me to draw up a contract that says, whatever, it's not a problem. So they did actually take a few of the tool purifiers in. But the fire brigade said it was an insurance thing. They said I said, I can pack test it, whatever you need, that's not a problem. And they said, no, we'd need to get authorisation from the powers that be, and they're too busy at the moment to worry about it. So I actually gave it to them to use at home. So, and then when we reactivated and I wanted to get all of my team back, I was like, oh, sugar.
I've got
to go and ask for some of this back now, So we left it longer and we actually ordered in some other gear. But the main point that sort of highlighted to us how the general public didn't understand what ventilation was when the government put out a plea for anybody that could possibly make ventilators to step forward.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of sort of do-gooders thought, I'm going to actually research and find people. So people were searching ventilation, finding farmwood, and ringing us up saying, are you making ventilators for the government? So people desperately need these ventilators. And I'm going, I'm really sorry. It's a different type of ventilation that we do. And it wasn't one call. It was probably 15, 20 calls a day.
Yeah.
Honestly. Excuse me. So that was a real, like, people don't get it. They don't understand what ventilation is. And because it's intangible most of the time. So that was like, okay, we now need to look at an education piece. And then when the associations all came back and everybody started to sort of remobilise and get back to work, that's when I started to push on the associations and saying, right, we need a campaign for this now. And then like, who's going to sponsor that? And I'm like, oh, okay, right, let's see what we can do. And that's where the first indoor air quality guide came from. That was like a big push to say, right, we need to do more on this. And the key thing, which is why it was sponsored, was to try and make it free. I mean, you and I have probably spent thousands of pounds downloading guidance, which is 50 pages long, and we only need 2 sections of it. But it is, it is a real expense, and I don't see why health and knowledge should cost. Because the analogy of people that work in a shed through to the shard, why should only the people at the top end have the money to be able to afford, guidance and documentation?
ATMA, as you'll know, one of the things that set ATMA off and started all of this was that we wrote standards. We wrote the original ATMA Technical Standard 1, how to do air tightness testing, and we published it, and we made it free to all. Mm-hmm. And I've been a big fan of that approach. We have the knowledge as an industry. Let's not harbour the knowledge. Let's completely share it. I've just upstairs, seconds before I came downstairs, just spent £250 on a standard. Now, granted, there are people that go in and write those standards, and it takes a lot of time, and people aren't going to volunteer in that same way. But on the flip side, if we want to improve what we do and how we do it, we need to make these standards accessible, especially to architects and to people that are designing these buildings. M&E consultants need to design a building, need to know what they're designing for, rather than make it guesswork or have them avoid downloading the standards or have bit parts of the standards. So I'm a big fan of that approach of developing it, making it free, giving it away, and these things always come back to you in different ways. In our example, we started the thing. We gained the trust of all the blower door testers. We created our certification scheme for air tightness testers, and it's enabled us to grow and fund everything we do here. And it all started because we were able to give those standards away. So I'm a very big fan of that. Cool. Next question. What does building performance look like to you? Let me rephrase the question. What does a high-performing building look like to Nathan? I asked this question of everybody, and I almost expect a different answer given different specialities. But if I was to say to you, let's narrow it down to a house, what would high-performing construction look like to you?
I would say modern. It's normally what I refer to as like the passive house look. Not your traditional brick built, but more of your fascia, large glazed windows, quirky roofs. That's what one would look like. It's almost your grand designs.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
So high performance in your mind's eye is that hyper modern,
futuristic, lots of glazing.
Is that for lots of light? Would that be your dream? You'd want lots of light in?
No, I would do the opposite.
You would?
Yeah, I would never be able to build a home with my wife because you can't make a decision unless she physically sees it. 3D renders are useless. Build it and then she'll change it, so it'll be a nightmare. Pretty much the way UK construction is done currently, I must say. So a lot of the problems that we address in the daily activities at Farmwood is the overheating problem. Now, a lot of the big glossy grand design style ones you see, it's a big bank of glass, bifold this and everything else. It's the worst that we can be doing in the UK. We need to look across into Europe, Spain, these hot climates whereby it's all shading, shutters. You know, I mean, I know that there's a lot of energy efficient, and they don't allow solar gain and films that you can put on glazing, but it's not the right way that we need to be going. It really isn't. The race to with net zero and everything else, people need to understand that there's now approved document O for overheating in buildings. And we had a case 2 weeks ago. It's one of the, being careful, it's one of the newer developments in Stratford, and housing block of flats, and the top flats was complaining of smells. So we was asked to deploy an air quality monitor, check out the VOCs, just as an indication. When I downloaded the data, I was just like, how is the temperature so high? It was like minimum 26 degrees at night. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's not healthy. I mean, I couldn't certainly be in there, but that's not healthy. And learning from others in the journey to where we are today is that sort of temperature constantly will dry out your mucous membranes, and that's your first line of defence. It's a bit like, I hate seeing, as funny as it is, these Turkish barbers where they put these wax strips up people's noses and pull them out. Those nose hairs are filters, you know, as coarse as they might be, they're actually filters to stop stuff getting in. So but the mucous membranes dry out and then people get poorly, which is why whenever we go to care homes, they say, well, we need it warm because people feel the cold. And I'm like, but you're just drying them out, and then they're just going to get infection after infection. I mean, that could be a whole other video, but it came down to being constantly high temperatures, and the smells were because of the wet traps drying out and all of the smells coming through the drains.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So they were, and it was the floors beneath as well. They changed the traps to dry traps. Smells went away.
Interesting.
That's how hot the place. And they were saying, well, what do we need to do to address these temperatures? Because they said, I've never put the heating on all of the time I've been here.
Yeah, interesting. I think the design of buildings is definitely something we need to be. Yeah. We need to look much better
Radical
at.
change.
And the answer isn't air conditioning. As much as my American friends will contest, we've done well without air conditioning so far. The planet's getting warmer, we know, but we can definitely build our buildings to avoid these overheating problems with some pretty simple steps. And I think you're a ventilation man. We do a lot of ventilation stuff. Purging the air shouldn't be the problem. Design in the first place should be the solution. Yeah, we should avoid it rather than deal with the consequences of it. I think we can do a lot better there. Final 3 questions. I ask the same questions of everybody that comes onto the podcast, and I always enjoy these. Parts. First question: if you could change one thing in the construction industry right now, what would it be and why?
That's a huge question. You should have sent these to me beforehand.
I could have, but then I wouldn't have had you thinking. Yeah, that would have been
fun. In the construction industry, so is that commercial and domestic?
Anything
like. At all?
Anything construction.
It would be to ensure that ventilation was its own trade in its own right.
Okay.
I think that would have such a positive impact across the board. Much as you know, covering design, installation and commissioning, and potentially to have commissioning as a third party, so you can't mark your own homework.
I'm a big fan of the Future Home Hub's recommendation to have a 4-step ventilation strategy, which is design, install, commission, and maintenance. Mm. And those could be 4 separate people. I think if you look at it realistically, those could be two different people. But we need those 4 very clear steps. Somebody has to design it. You shouldn't be installing without a design plan. Mm. Brickies don't brick the side of a house without knowing where the window's going to go.
But there is no design in ventilation.
Yeah.
There is no design. So this is interesting. I had a meeting at another association that shall remain nameless, and there was multiple. So there was multiple associations, one for the industry and 2 specifically in ventilation, 1 domestic, 1 commercial. You was there.
Was I at that meeting?
You was there.
I was at the meeting.
And I threw a load of Fs. I threw a load of Fs into the meeting.
I was thinking for a second I might have known that.
Yeah, and you remember this vividly, but just for people watching, I pretty much said what we've currently got, and that was why you was there, to sort of promote what you've done and what can be done. And it was very much, it's a shit show where we are. What can we do as associations to collaborate for the better good and the industry and health and savings to the NHS, which is in the billions? And the answer that came back from one of the guys there was, well, Nathan, we need to look at quick wins and a long-term plan. And at that stage, I sort of said, well, F to that. If you're not going to do something positive about it, I'm sure associations start up overnight somehow. Maybe I need to set up my own.
Yeah. What's interesting is actually from that meeting, I think a few days later I flew to Australia.
Yes.
And you may have seen this in a clip circulating on LinkedIn recently. After that meeting, flew to Australia, and on the way back, 24-hour flight, I wrote an entire, or about 90% of a standard called ATMA TFL1. And ATMA TFL1 is a domestic ventilation commissioning standard. So I sat on the plane the entire way from the top to the bottom and wrote a standard, because I thought one of my pet hates in the industry is that we often, and I'm on various committees for a bunch of weird and wonderful things, but I'm on a bunch of ventilation ones, and I have been for 2 or 3 years, and they've never done anything. And it just frustrates me. So I'm much more of a character to turn around and say, I'll just write the standard. It's much easier for me to write the standard, distribute the standard for comment, take on board those comments, add and take away whatever I need to, and publish the standard. It means that we also can own that standard. But incredibly, from TFL1, we published it, we put it out on LinkedIn to say, here it is, it's 90% complete, help us finish it. And for people to write the final couple of percent here, couple of percent there, was a lot easier for them to swallow if an association takes charge of it. So I get equally, and from that very committee, I get very frustrated that nothing actually happens. And I think that's, but coming back to your original point, having ventilation as its own industry,
most definitely,
would be
having its own skills card, if they will be a thing of the future as well. You know?
Don't get me started on skills cards.
Yeah.
I've been fighting with them
okay.
very recently because air tightness and sound insulation testers were removed from skills cards because we just are not worthy.
It's crazy.
And we're getting our local MP involved. So
Fair
it's very frustrating. As you know, most accidents, the majority of accidents happen within 30 minutes of being on a construction site, and air and sound testers travel to multiple sites per day. They are one of the super high risk categories, but the CSCS system has failed them somewhat.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's also talk of there's a lot of hate within the industry, and that is the right word, whereby ventilation apprenticeships were removed, and there's a lot of mud flinging going on, and I sort of sit in between it all, and I listen to all sides. I do have my allegiances, but I'm completely independent, and it was because there was no uptake from the industry. That's what it comes down to. I've seen the numbers. They're the numbers with the main association, and it's like any business. If you didn't have people coming through the door for a certain course, you couldn't afford to run it, and it's the same for the training centres for apprenticeships. The only thing was, in the HVAC, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, on the commercial side, there is NVQs for heating, there is NVQs for AC. The ventilation side was mainly the ducting and the duct hygiene. It didn't cover, it still doesn't cover ventilation in terms of resistance, flow rates, design and everything else. But whatever we do commercially needs to be adopted domestically as well.
Yeah.
And this is where I come back to the point about there's no design. So maybe 2 things to that question. Making it its own skill set, its own right, with apprenticeships, training and everything else. But also to ensure that there is design, because I met with an association for manufacturers of domestic ventilation systems, skirting around to the name there, and they said, no, we don't do design. I said, you do design. I get the overlay, the flat and everything else, and the block with all of the ducting. No, that's just an indication of what would work with that system.
Oh, that's a liability.
And then another chap said, no, we do design, but it will cost £1,000, 1,500 quid, and I can't think how many we've done in X amount of time. I said, but installers call that the design. When you turn up and you say, right, where's your design? They go, there it is, and we take it, we go, okay, no, it's not. If you check the T's and C's, it's not a design. So we're not designing.
It's a liability issue.
massive. So there's a lot
Very
to be done on that
frustrating.
side.
Who is inspiring you right now? You don't have to say me.
There's a lot.
Give me one name, somebody that's inspiring you right now. That could be celebrity, past, present. That could be construction industry. That could be family. Who's inspiring you?
There's a few. So there's the biggest. Oh no, the biggest one's easy. Rosamund Adu, Kizzy Deborah, who's the mother of late Ella Roberta, who died through being continuously poisoned by London road air pollution. So she was the first.
South London Ring Road, was it?
South London Ring Road. She was the first person in the UK, possibly, I think it is the world, to have air pollution listed as a major contributory impact on her death.
Yeah.
And maybe I can touch on this a little bit. So
Let's go for it.
This is like another Ratcliffe moment, if you like. So after the DIY SOS and before IAQ became this big thing, I started going to these sort of what are now like Mums for Lungs and these sort of little London communities that were trying to raise money so their local school could get purifiers. It was around the same sort of time that Sadiq Khan was doing the Clean Air Toolbox for schools, and that's still available. £200,000 of taxpayers' money was spent on that. It's online. I don't think anybody ever refers to it. Gives you hints and tips on what you can do from barriers to pollution mitigation and everything else in between. So I think it was in Camden. I went to this small school with a real diverse group of people, from young people. There was kids there, older guys, and then there was a few guys that were putting their business cards out. And I'm like, I'm just going to sit at the back, just listen and soak this up. And Rosamund stood up and she explained the story of young Ella, and I was just like, oh. Another one.
Yeah.
Here we go. I don't do emotions, but clearly I do. Maybe I need to stop saying like I don't do emotions. I am an emotional guy. And again, you relate it to your own kids and what she would have been through. And it was really difficult for me to go, I call her Ros now, we've become friends. Ros, terrible about your daughter. Here's my card, let's have a cuppa. And it was trying to sort of broach that gap. So I literally stalked her, she won't mind me saying this, and worked out when she was going to places. I think it was mainly on Twitter or X, when she would say where she was going, what she was doing. Started connecting with the different schools and trying to find out. And I remember going to the London Mayor's office, and she didn't hold back. She literally gave it warts and all. And I was waiting for her to leave to try and go, look, loved what you're about, been following you for ages, da-da-da-da-da. I'd love to buy you coffee sometime. And literally, she was walking up in front of me. There's a big sort of ramped area that works out the place, and she had a micro scooter under her arm. She was chatting to this other lady. And I made out like I was in a rush. I'm like, excuse me, lady, excuse me. Oh, hi, Ros, It's a bit like sort of, I would imagine it, I've been married a long time, but if you was dating again, how you'd sort of try and court is the old word that I would use. Ros, loved what you're about. I said, love to buy you a coffee sometime. And the woman beside her, oh, check in, taking you for a brew and all the rest of it. So it was a real laugh. Gave him a card, said, gotta go, I've got to get a train. Left. Next day, phone call. Is that you, cheeky? I was just like, Rosamund? She's like, how are you, darling? Let's have that cup of tea. And yeah, had a cup of tea. And she gave me the deep story of everything. And I was just like, look, how can I help? What are you doing? How can I get involved? I'm with these associations. You're working with the London Mayor and building all of this. How can we work with you? How can we support you? Give you a pedestal with the association. So she became our, what was her official role? Honorary chairman, I think it was, of the association, the IAQ group. And she came along to the national conferences and networked with everybody. And she said she learned so much from the industry. And she's a clever lady, Rosamund, because she knows that people have got a financial angle to play off of her and everything else. But yeah, we've done so much work with her that's been in the press, and a lot that's been behind the scenes that we're not going to preach about, but in terms of supporting her cause and what she's doing and how she's doing things. And the strength in which she can stand up in front of people and talk about the loss of her daughter is truly inspiring.
Unimaginable, isn't it?
Yeah, and
wow.
if if I had half of her strength, God forbid I ever go for anything like that. But yeah, she is an amazing, inspiring woman.
Oh, it's a great shout. It'll be, I'm sure she has various work she's doing. Maybe you could help us with some something to put in the description in the video, so we can link people to the right
The foundation is ellaroberta.org. That's the main focus on the foundation there, and there's loads of links off the back.
We'll make sure that gets put into the
brilliant. Thank you. Yeah,
into the description. Last question. Tell me something you'd have done differently in your career, your working career, if you could do it all again. One thing, something you've done differently.
Not invent. If I'd just done something completely left field.
I mean, you could invent something. I'll give you that.
Well, dropping back, I loved the steel mill. So if I could change anything, it would be for that to have continued. And the people and the processes and the camaraderie that was there, that was awesome. That was a rose-tinted look back at my life being at the steel mill. That was a great place. What I know today and what I've done for the community. I mean, since the steel mill shut, the DEFRA outside air quality monitoring station has been taken away because Sheppey hasn't got any pollution now. The steel mill's gone. You know, never mind the docks just straight over the road or the terrible traffic we've got.
I was thinking, it's quite.
Yeah, they took it away. So the station we did have is gone. Go for the question again. What if I could?
Question again. If you could have done something differently in your career, if you could do it all again.
Studied harder.
Studied harder?
Yeah, biology.
Biology?
Something I'm lacking in massively is the sciences, basically.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Out of anything that I do today, having a fundamental understanding of bodily functions, I've learnt so much about it. I mean, it's from air purifiers and how they change chemical compounds, how paint interacts at different temperatures, how the physics of building materials change depending on temperature and relative humidity, the drying out of mucous membranes and how things enter your body. And you know, I remember a study, the BBC promoted it, and it was about how some scientists in the Netherlands got together, made ultrafine particles of gold, and then had some human volunteers and some not some voluntary rats breathe it in for 15 minutes, and they used gold because it's inert to the body. And after 15 minutes of breathing in ultrafine particles of gold, they then took regular blood and urine samples. I think it's for 6 months. And then at the end of the 6 months, they dissected the rats. They didn't dissect the humans. They were free to go. And this blew me apart. So just from 15 minutes of exposure, so ultrafine particles of gold, in the human volunteers, they found it in their blood and their urine 3 months later. And when they dissected the mice, they found it in every single part of their body. And I was just like, I need to understand this more. I need to get my head around this. How, and basically, ultrafine particles
You can see it,
into the lining of the lungs, through into the bloodstream and travel to every single part of your body, which is why my layman's understanding of why air pollution is related to everything from weight loss to weight gain to Alzheimer's to everything in between is because it all depends on what toxin you've inhaled and where it stops in your body. That's the way I understand
that's fascinating. I think we've got a name for the podcast there, Dr. Nathan Woods.
Well, you joke.
Good.
Dr. Douglas Booker, really good friend, is another one that you should maybe think about speaking to. He actually said to me, Nathan, the amount of time that you've spent in your life talking and learning about air quality, you should have done a PhD. And I was just like, Doug, I'm nowhere near clever enough to do a PhD.
Yeah, if you could do a PhD just by talking it out, that would be good. That'd be cool. Okay, well, I think that's everything. So thanks for coming down, Nathan. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on and to hear a little bit more. Some of it I've heard before, some of it I've not. It's also great to hear you also get choked up at the DIY SOS, although I'm watching it on the telly and you're feeling it in real life. And I guess on behalf of a lot of the ventilation industry and people involved and the construction industry, thank you for continuing to raise that awareness and for the relative associations you belong to as well, because it is something in this country that is just unacceptable at the moment. We are so far behind when it comes to ventilation. it is just, it's untrue, and it's frustrating. So I'm really pleased that you're out there pushing it. And if I could, if I was on site taking those pictures, I'd be pushing them too. So keep doing what you're doing.
Cool.
Thanks for coming down, and we'll see you very soon.